Welcome back to this podcast. Today we'll be discussing assessment criteria. We'll be looking at specifically how to attempt each assessment requirement for this unit. I will record the learning outcome which is right on the screen. The first learning outcome to be covered is to understand the sources of finance available to a business venture. The second one is to understand the implication of finance as a resources within a business venture. The third one is to be able to make financial decisions based on the financial information provided in the financial statement. The last learning outcome will be for learners to be able to evaluate the financial statement or performance of a business. I will now move to the next slide. The assessment. All coursework is assessed through written assessment. Assessment include case studies or project based on specific business organization. That means you must either use a case study or your place of work or a simulated case study. Learners will benefit from the analysis of real organization. The word count for this task or this assignment is between 2,500 words to 3,500 words. All sources used for this assignment should be properly referenced and cited in the assignment. Plagiarized or copied work will not be acceptable. What do we mean by plagiarism? We have already covered this link in our previous podcast. Learners are advised to follow the link through the college Moodle. However, I would like to recap what we mean by plagiarism. Plagiarism is the inclusion of another person's writing or idea or work in any formally presented work, including essays, including this assignment for Unit 2, thesis, projects, laboratory reports, and examinations, without due acknowledgement, either wholly or in part, of the original source of the material through appropriate citation. What that means is, anywhere you use information from the internet, from the textbook, from journals, you need to reference them properly in your assignment. Plagiarism include presenting work authored by third party, including other students, friends, or family, work purchased through internet services, presenting work copied extensively with only minor textual changes from the internet, book, journals, or any other sources. That is what we mean by plagiarism. Learners are expected to produce original work and submit to the college. Therefore, you are required to use the Harvard referencing style or system in your work. Again, I will point out here, if you follow the link in the college virtual learning environment, you should be able to access all the information regarding plagiarism and the Harvard referencing styles. This work is expected to be typed using the Microsoft Word. 1.5 line spacing is required. The font face is Arial. The font size is 12. Avoid using bullet points in your work and number your pages. The assignment structure. The assignment structure is very important for any student or learner attempting to pass any course. So therefore, I will plead with all students to follow this basic assignment structure laid down for this unit. The first thing you are required to produce or to write in your work is the introduction. The introduction, you need to discuss your plan for the assignment, the case study chosen, and how you will address the task. The next part is the body of your work that include the use of assessment criteria. For example, assessment criteria 1.1, identify the sources of finance available to a business. All you need to do here is to explain every information relating to assessment criteria 1.1 by giving examples, analyzing issues, by using your own place of work or case studies to support your work. The next part is conclusions. Summarize everything you've written from assessment criteria 1.1 to 4.3 without adding additional new information. After the conclusion, the next part of your work is the reference list, where you are required to list all materials used alphabetically. And the last part of your assignment is to attach appendices, if any. For this course, you are required, or this unit, to attach the financial statement you have analyzed as an appendix in order to support your work. We will now move on to resources. These are available resources that you can use to help you write this assignment. Course D is a textbook. We got journals, website, BZ website. You can follow all the link and gather any information useful for you to pass the assessment. Section 1. To understand the sources of finance available to a business. Under Section 1, you are required to attempt the three main assessment criteria: 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. Our next plan for this podcast would be to look at the issue one after the other. For example, in attempting assessment criteria 1.1, you are required to identify different sources of business finance. Before you do that, you need to identify different types of business and compare their sources of finance. Examples of business include limited companies, sole trader, partnership, government organization, charitable institutions. You can use business like Tesco, Asda, British Gas, and your own place of work. The first thing you need to do is discuss the internal sources. For example, sales income or revenue, retained profit, sale of assets, and debt collection from debtors. The second part is for you to discuss and analyze external sources. For example, the bank loans, the overdraft, the government grants, leasing, hire purchase, mortgage, and issue of shares. It is possible to differentiate the companies and tell us which sources of finance a sole trader will likely use to develop his or her business, which sources of finance self-employed people will likely use to invest in a given project. Ensure to reference all sources used to write 1.1. We now move on to assessment criteria 1.2. 2. The question says, assess the implications of the different sources of finance. The first thing you need to do is to identify both the negative and positive implications of the sources of finance you talked about in 1.1. For example, sale of an asset, we all know, will reduce the value of the business. This is a possible implication, and as well will affect the perception of the general public that this company is not doing well financially at the moment. Another example of the implication is the lender of loans might decide to influence how the money should be spent. We call that dilution of control. Investment partners in partnership might as well decide to have a controlling stake of the business. Give examples using case studies identified in 1.1 as well as your own place of work to discuss the implication of the identified sources of finance you discussed previously. The next part of the assessment criteria is 1.3, and it says evaluate appropriate sources of finance for a business project. You are expected to identify both the advantages and the disadvantages of the sources of finance you have identified in 1.1. Or you can select a specific project your organization is interested on executing and identify the sources of funds you think is appropriate for this project. Lastly, you can as well make specific recommendation why you think the sources identified will better meet the financial needs of your organization, bearing in mind the advantages and disadvantages. I will give you an example. If you decide to borrow money from the bank, a loan for 6 months, the advantage is that you have sufficient funds to invest in your project. The disadvantage is that you need to pay some amount of cost, which is interest payable to the original sum borrowed. You can research other advantages and disadvantages available for sources of funds and add to your work and ensure you reference all sources used. We now move on to section 2. The section 2 of this unit 2 is about understanding the implication of finance as a resource within a business. We have 4 main assessment criteria to contend with. 2.1. Analyze the cost of different sources of finance. 2.2. Explain the importance of financial planning. 2.3. Assess the information needs of decision makers. 2.4. You are expected to explain the impact of finance on the financial statement. Let's move on to 2.1. What are the costs of different sources of finance? For example, the cost of obtaining finance include interest on loans, and this interest might be variable or fixed interest rate. The cost, secondly, which is the cost of managing finance, They include fee payable to the financial consultant and stockbrokers. You need to consult this expert to be able to give you the information you need or require to approach your bank and borrow the money needed. Fees payable to mortgage advisors, tax advisors, administrative fees such as traveling expenses, and the cost can result to loss of control of your business as well, because financial lenders will tend to suggest how your business should be managed. Let's now move on to 2.2 assessment criteria. The 2.2 says you need to explain the importance of financial planning. We have discussed this already in the class podcast. First, provide more details why financial planning is important to a business organization. Why do you think financial planning is important to a business venture? Use practical examples of your organization or external business within your area you have identified. One example of the importance of financial planning is that it helps business or businesses to manage their income efficiently. You are required to add as much example you can find out there to support your work. The next learning outcome talked about the assessment of the information needs of different decision makers. You are required to assess the information needs of different decision makers. We have been able to identify decision makers in our previous podcast that they include managers, employees, investors, in the short form, the stakeholders. Identify the decision makers inside the organization as well as outside the organization. Internal decision makers are managers and team leaders. External decision makers are lending institutions such as banks, government agencies, and shareholders. Discuss the financial information they might likely need and why. Give examples as much as possible. For example, what kind of information you think an investor will require from your company to lend you money? You'll be looking at your current assets and your fixed assets in your balance sheet. We will now move on to assessment criteria 2.4. You are required here to explain the importance of finance on the financial statement. First, explain how the appearance of sales, for example, sales revenue, gross profit, net profit, assets, liabilities, share issues can affect the overall position of the profit and loss account as well as the balance sheet. For example, in the profit and loss account, if the gross profit is negative, automatically it will lead to negative net profit. Therefore, financial users or accounting users can as well make a decision and say that this business is not viable. What we mean by that is the users of accounting information can conclude that your sales revenue is very low or very high, your gross profit is positive or negative. Either you make a gross profit or gross loss, either you make net profit or net loss. The same situation is applicable to the assets in your balance sheet. You can as well discuss how the above information can affect the perception of users of accounting information. You also need to explain why organizations should ensure all reasonable care are taken, as well be more transparent in preparing their financial statement. These are required by accounting standards. Let's move on to section 3. The learning outcome is be able to make financial decisions based on financial information. And all learners are required to meet the assessment criteria of 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3. 3.1 says to analyze budget and make appropriate decisions and recommendations to your business organization. 3.2 is to explain the calculation of unit cost and make pricing decisions using relevant information. 3.3 to assess the viability of a project using the investment appraisal techniques. Analyze a budget and make appropriate decisions. First, you are required to source for a budget for at least 6 months. That means budget that includes 6 months to 1 year budgeted period. Show the budget calculation and formulas in your assignment. This is very important. This will tell the tutors that this work is your work and not copied. You are required to show the calculations and the formula of the chosen budget. Discuss the positive and negative implications of the findings of your budget. What are the results of the budget you have calculated? Do you want the company to increase probably the sales budget or production budget? You can as well choose about 3 different budgets from the list below: the sales budget, the cash budget, production and direct labor budget, material purchases budget, overhead budget, and calculate showing formulas and all workings and make your decisions as to why you think this budget is good for this organization. We therefore move to learning assessment criteria 3.2. To explain the calculation of unit cost and make pricing decisions using relevant information. We have talked about this in our previous podcast on this unit. You need to calculate unit cost, selling price, variable and fixed cost. You should as well calculate the break-even point, sensitivity analysis, and the price elasticity of demand. You need to show the calculations and the formula in your work. This as well is very important to demonstrate that this work is authentic and genuine. Discuss the positive and the negative implications of the cost and pricing decisions you have calculated. Give examples to support your response. Our next discussion is assessment criteria 3.3. You are expected to analyze budgets. You are expected to assess the viability of a project using investment techniques. Investment appraiser techniques. The first thing you need to do there is explain the techniques for assessing whether a project will be profitable or not. And some of the techniques include the accounting rate of return, the payback period, the net present value, and the internal rate of return. Show the calculations as well as explanation as to why a business should invest or not invest in a particular project based on the result of your calculations. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the techniques you have described. The important thing to do in assessment criteria 3.3 is to be able to make a decision to your organization or choosing organization that they should either invest in project A or project B based on so certain criteria you found out, as well as ensure that all sources you use are adequately referenced. We move to the last learning outcome, which is the section 4 for unit 2. Be able to evaluate the financial performance of a business. Discuss 4.1, the main financial statement. 4.2 says you should compare appropriate formats of financial statement for different types of business organization. 4.3, interpret financial statement using appropriate ratios and comparisons, both internal and external ratios as well. Let's look at 4.1 in detail, what you are required. 4.1, you are required to describe the main financial statement. The main financial statement are the profit and loss account, the balance sheet, the cash flow statement. Discuss the content of the financial statements, their uses, and the implication of those contents on the overall position of the company in the business environment. Look at the content of the profit and the loss account. For example, overheads. In the expenses section, which is debited, if the overhead is too much, if the company, in other words, is incurring too much expenses, that means there might be net loss instead of net profit. The same principle applies to the balance sheet. What are the content of the balance sheet? What is the balance sheet used for? Look at the assets and the liabilities of this balance sheet and determine the current asset and the current liability as well to see if there is enough working capital to manage the business. The cash flow, what is the cash flow used for? To determine the inflow and the outflow of cash to a given business venture. We look at 4.2. The question says, compare appropriate format of financial statement for different type of business. The first thing you need to do here is you are required to compare the financial statement for different businesses such as partnership, sole trader, and limited companies. The reason is because their financial statement, for example partnership, there is a column for profit sharing and partners liability. The sole trader statement is different, and the limited companies are required to publish the account, and some of these financial statements, their formats are different and they are legally bounded to ensure they follow the appropriate format. Differentiate between profit and loss account, balance sheet, and cash flow statement of the organization you are choosing. You can as well attach any financial statement you use as an appendix to your work. Explain published and unpublished financial statements. Discuss the legal requirement why businesses are expected to present their financial statement in a certain way. Ensure to acknowledge or reference all the sources you have used. The last part of this Unit 2 is to interpret financial statement using appropriate ratios and comparisons, both internal and external as well. First, you need to analyze and make appropriate decisions using at least 3 years financial statement. The profit and loss account, the balance sheet statement, should be taken from your organization or external businesses you know, because this is where you derive most of the information you need for your ratio analysis. Show the calculation of at least 5 ratios that include the profitability ratios, efficiency ratios, liquidity ratios. Use ratios such as net profit, gross profit ratio, current asset ratio, asset test ratios, and the shareholders ratios, and make comparisons of these ratios. 3 years comparison is very good, which is the minimum. You can as well compare 2 organizations within the same industry. For example, in the retail industry, you can compare 2 organizations, or use the industry standard to make comparison as well. The last part is to discuss why ratios are important financial tools, as well as make recommendations based on your findings. We've been able to explain the basic steps to attempt the Unit 2 assignment. If you require further information, we suggest you follow the appropriate links in the college module or website, and as well as contact your tutors in the college for additional help. Thank you very much.